displace people out of the misery that they were in. And but Iraq, not being as bureaucratically sophisticated as Turkey, but it is also a middle-income country that has a lot of money. So our role is very different, and we are focusing on the humanitarian part, but now basically applying the nexus, while the humanitarian assistance is now slowly merging into development assistance. And that is, it's interesting that for us, the UN, it is very complicated, and also donors, the explanations that we have to do, how do we do that? Well, our beneficiaries, they don't care where the money comes from. They don't care if it has a tag humanitarian or development. They just want to have a school, and they want to have a roof over their head and a decent job. So this is something that when we talk about nexus, which we always have to keep in mind, that actually the nexus is something that is very internal. It's very UN internal, and it's an internal discussion, and it's a discussion with donors. Even the governments, at least the Iraqi government, does not distinguish. So they just want to know if we can do it or not. And I think when one realizes that, it makes then the application of the nexus and the explanation much easier. And the explanation is easier, but making it happen is not necessarily easy, because we internally have created these two boxes that have not talked to each other, and now we are expecting that these boxes suddenly understand each other, and it's a tall order. We have in Iraq now we have signed a cooperation framework agreement after a long period. Now there is a document that actually has a longer term perspective, also for the government, how they will relate to the UN. And this is also something that still has to be practiced by the government, because I don't think that they are fully realizing the impact of this, while we at the same time still do humanitarian assistance, because it's definitely badly needed. While discussing this with the government and explaining to them the intricacies of this, internally we have applied, and this is something with Sherry when we were sitting end of last year, how do we make this nexus thing happen? How do we, how do we make it work? So the result of our joint brainstorming was that we have to identify geographic areas where we have high level of returns. That means high level of our humanitarian and development activity. And in these geographic areas, we will bring then the humanitarian and the development actors together, and we let them coordinate this small geography, and there we act as one. Not only acting as one, but also complementing each other, identifying where there are gaps, and to see if an agency that is already active, humanitarian or development, if they can pitch in. So in practice, if there is a village that was completely destroyed, do we have UNDP that can rebuild the house? Do we have UNICEF that can make sure that the teachers are trained and are in school? But do we then have an agency that can do the wells, and somebody who can train the police? And this is a mix of humanitarian and development actors. So we started with this ABC approach in January. We gave it terms of reference. Now we are learning throughout the year. We are now adjusting the terms of reference, because reality was a little bit different than what we hoped for. And now we will, I would say, now we will be entering a second phase, which I hope will be now really the scenario that we are aiming at. So that is where we are on the nexus and coordination. A little bit about relationship to the mission. So to be in a mission setting, that means that we have a political mission there. There is an SRSG that has a political mandate, and an election mandate, and which is rather sizable in Iraq. So there are a lot of political analysts that are based in every governorate in Iraq, and also in Baghdad and in Erbil. There are a lot of people that are analyzing and observing and writing reports, which is very much different to what the country team does, that is oriented towards the beneficiaries and to make things happen on the ground. It is not let's say, it's not a problematic relationship, it's just these are two completely different entities that have a completely different goal. Let's say on the leadership level, we have a good communication. However, really bringing these two parts of the UN House together so that one benefits from the other, there is a little bit a long way to go. Like the political analysis, the economic analysis, that is done by by UNAMI in that case. We are, as country team, still not there to have actually a discussion with a part of the House. So this is something that I'm very much advocating for, because the reform is there to make sure that anything that happens under the UN flag is coherent. And this we can only achieve if we have mechanisms, simple mechanisms, like 3 times a year sitting really down and discussing things. Where are we going together? This is something that needs to be institutionalized and hasn't been done yet, but this is what basically we are advocating for, because only then we will sing from the same sheet, and we will be also coherent what happens under the UN flag. So that, in a nutshell, that's where we are. But maybe Sherry?
No, I think you've done it perfectly.
Thank you.
Maybe I want to apologize, Sherry. I should have welcomed you very warmly, because really OCHA is most welcome. We are learning so much. Colleagues, this is Sherry Ritzema Anderson, who's the head of OCHA in Iraq. I think it's so fantastic that you and Irena have come together. And really, we have a few OCHA colleagues sitting in the room as well. So we're very pleased to borrow and learn from the OCHA's own coordination experience. So I would love for you to say a few words as well, and then we have ample time, I think, till 10:15 for colleagues to ask questions. So would love to hear your perspective as well, Sherry.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosemary. I mean, it's very kind of you. I'm really happy to just be allowed to sit in and observe, because I have to say, from the OCHA side, we don't often actually get to peek in to the more of the development coordination side. I mean, obviously we're the UNCT in country, but the mechanics behind that is not so much often very visible to us. So it's really interesting, I think, as you said, to sit together and to learn from each other at this juncture. In terms of Iraq, the nexus, as Irena, I think, is very, very capably laid out. It's a perfect opportunity to see how can we operationalize the nexus. It is a context where you need all parts of international assistance and the government to everybody be pulling their weight, be pulling in the same direction with the different tools and different mandates and focus, financing, but all working in the same direction, because there's so much that is yet undone. There's so much that needs to be achieved in order for the work of supporting the communities, reestablishing local government, local services, safety, security, justice mechanisms, all of the whole range of things. A lot of it's been achieved, but there's still a lot yet to be achieved. How we do that exactly, as I think as Irena said, is that we're innovating in real time. It's a lot, as all innovations are, a lot of bumps in the road and fits and spurts, and trying to see what actually works and what doesn't, and how do you tweak it so it does work. And again, it's this notion of, can we, particularly at the local level, can we empower people at the local level, the humanitarian colleagues, the development colleagues, the local government, can we put them all in the same room? Can they then start finding solutions, figuring out what needs to happen, how and where? And then and I think one of the biggest challenges is how do you connect that back up to the strategic level? right? So you have multiple levels that we all work at. And one of the things the donors have repeatedly asked, particularly the humanitarian donors, ironically, is more about development assistance. So the humanitarian donors are asking us, how does the local level coordination connect into their development strategy, which is all done at a national level? So how do we connect those different levels? You know, in Iraq, one of the main challenges as well is that you do have a central government, of course, but a lot of the decision making, a lot of the real effectiveness of solutions comes at the local level. It doesn't actually come from the national. You know, so you have to talk to the ministries, you have to talk to the government at the central level, but it's also been very highly decentralized from there on out. And it's really actually much more effective to work at the municipality level. So how do you keep that coherent? How do you keep the humanitarian, which is, you know, very grassroots, very constituent driven in many ways? It's a huge constituency. It includes NGOs. How do you make that coherent with a development system, which, as Irena always says, you know, the government is fundamentally in charge of developments. You know, you have to, and donors can go bilaterally to government agencies and not even involve the UN.
And they do.
All. So, and where then do NGOs fit into that structure? And so it becomes, it is really an innovation as we go to see what will work within the sort of basic guidelines and sort of established characteristics of each of the systems. And again, it's at that local level that we think, you know, you really, practically speaking, you can put everybody in the same room, the NGOs, the UN, the government, get real discussions, and then we try and sort of back that out up to the strategic level to make that coherent. Because I think it's actually easier to make like a humanitarian needs overview and a CCA coherent than it is to actually get operational inter-relevance and coordination at the local level, right? So anyway, it's a really interesting endeavor. Irena's great. I would tell you she's the best person for the job because she can wear all three hats at the same time, which is a big head. Not that she was a big head, but very capable, talented person that can switch and go back and forth. But yeah, it's a really interesting, and I think in a year's time, Rosemary, it'd be really interesting to stop and look back over like this coming year to see where we've gone.
Thank you. As Sherry was talking, actually, what we are doing, we are looking at the needs of the beneficiaries, and then we adjust our system accordingly. And that's the thing. It's not we have a system and now how do we fit the beneficiaries, and it is the other way around. That's basically the concept that we are looking at, and hopefully will work. We'll see.
Thank you so much. In fact, as you were talking, you know, I was, in the context of the Afghanistan response, this concept of nexus is being interrogated, I think, more strategically and more assertively than I've heard before. And I was thinking, as you said, perhaps, you know, it would be good for us to have a think piece on what the nexus means based on the experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan and Venezuela. And, you know, there are so many places where it has to mean more than it has in the past, right, for us. But colleagues, this is your opportunity to ask about partnerships, about local level solutions, about sustainable development, about cross-pillar work, the political angle, and perhaps even just amazing women leaders, right? Anything is up for asking here, and we have colleagues from across DCO and the system online and in the room, I think. So the floor is open. All I would ask is, let's take maybe rounds of threes. Please introduce yourself so that we know who you are, what you do, and which agency you're with, and ask away. Floor is open. There's always this breaking.
We explained it so well, so nobody has a question.
Well, there are questions, I'm sure of it.
But also, as you have mentioned, Afghanistan, actually it is 2 weeks before Afghanistan got into this very dangerous place where they are now. I had a long talk with Ramiz, and we were discussing the area-based coordination, how it can be applied in Afghanistan. and it took 2 weeks, and then everything fell apart. So, but now it's becoming even more relevant because everything is so local that centrally, you have difficulties to do things. So, just as you mentioned Afghanistan. So, yeah.
Okay. So either I have to call on people or they have to ask questions. But Silke, I see you online. Perhaps you want to ask a question. But maybe Nadia, you can kick us off because you've been with OCHA and now you're with DCO. And perhaps some frank reflections. Don't worry, we won't hold it against you.
Neither side. Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I thought it was very interesting. And as you say, Rosemary, it's interesting to be on what you would say one box and then the other. And I think one of the endeavors that I've been trying to do since I'm here is make it far less of two boxes, but much more working together, because I think ultimately that's what we're doing, and we have a similar mandate when it comes to coordination. And ultimately, it's to make to improve the lives of the people that we're doing this. So I think it's the way to go for sure. I really like the project that you've put forward. I was just wondering, because there's always, for having been on the humanitarian side, there's always this concern that by working too much together, we might, encroach on the humanitarian principles. And some actors on the ground have very, straightforward understanding of what their mandates are. So I was just wondering, from a very practical and simple perspective, how was it received, or is it received on the ground, and is it working? Are the people actually really keeping the common goal in mind to make it happen, or are you still, what are the kind of hurdles you have to go through to adjust for people to actually work together?
Yeah, as you say, we are still in the middle of it. Exactly, these things. What you are saying, it's a challenge, but it makes me always extremely anxious when people say, but we have a problem with it. I said, how can you have a problem? We are just helping people. The humanitarian helps with one thing, what the humanitarian can do, and the development helps with something else. But we are there to help the people. So let's not make it a problem, but let's look at how is it that we complement each other. And I was giving the example, when we have a village where we have now, which is completely destroyed, we have 3 families that are returning. There is no livelihood. That means that these families, they still need humanitarian assistance to survive. So humanitarians do their job, but their houses are destroyed, so they need help for rebuilding the house, which is not humanitarian. This is development. So we need to really look at where do we complement each other, not blurring the lines. Humanitarian has to do what is humanitarian, and development has to do what development does. And real life also is not looking at that. So we always have to forget about the boxes, but say that's what I can do and that's what you can do. But it's a long way.
Yeah, the only thing I would compliment is to say I think in Iraq the protection situation in particular is quite unique because it is so prominent throughout everything that goes on, right? So we have ISIL affected communities, we have communities that were aligned to ISIL in fact or in perception, and so this is a thread that actually the entire UN in one way or another is working on, because it's part and parcel of the terrain now that has to be dealt with for the country to go forward. So I think one of the things that saves us, if you will, a little bit at the local level from these discussions is the fact that the development community and UNAMI, who's less involved in the local discussions but more at the strategic level, if you maintain that rights-based approach throughout all of our work, the UN has these core values, we have the human rights frameworks, if we keep the centrality of human rights throughout every part of our work, then all of us, then we're all on the same page. And in Iraq, we do actually, you see that in the political mission, you see it in the development framework, and actors, you see it in the humanitarians. We don't really come into the protection question as much as I know in other places. That's more of an issue, particularly the humanitarian side. What I would say is probably, frankly, one of our biggest challenges is just getting tools and systems, because you have a humanitarian system that's highly developed, and it's got all of our tools and our ways that we do things and, whatever. And then you've got a development system that Rosemary was saying, is still developing and is still coming online. And then now we've kind of got this third in between that we're trying to merge or make the two coherent. And sometimes it just comes down to very irritating, but things like spreadsheets and like stuff like that. How do you build coherence without duplicating? And I think that's where a lot of right now the frustrations are around some of those sort of pieces of how do we get that part right.
And it's also because in humanitarian we have the NGOs that are very prominent, and they are used to a strict structure, and they see the development that the humanitarian funding will be slowly disappearing. So they are asking me, so how can we get into development? I said, that's not my job, that's your job. But still, we are now, while we are working together, so we are actually taking them on the journey to be connected to development, and some of them they will then make the leap themselves. But that's not like, as in RC, that's not my responsibility. As HC, it is, and that's where also the understanding of the NGO community then has to be very much adjusted. Yeah.
I really like these reflections. Just a few weeks ago, I met the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Counterterrorism, and she was expressing a lot of disquiet about the counterterrorism work of the United Nations and advocating exactly what you're saying, the absolute necessity of keeping a human rights-based approach as we deal with the very real problems of terrorism in these contexts. I want to abuse my privilege as chair to ask a question, and then actually there's a hand up, and I'll come to that in a minute. And that is, two questions actually. One is, obviously your work in Iraq cannot happen without being conscious of what's happening across borders, right? So is there a collaboration with country teams and RCs in the neighborhood, so to speak? And if so, what does that look like, or what should that look like? The second is, we don't usually see women leaders in these so-called complex settings or crisis settings. What does it feel like? Because I know there's a lot of soul searching in the UN about how to have more women in these countries, right? And then I'd like to give the floor to Sarah Nianti, RC in Nepal, who's going to have the floor for the second part of this session, to hear from her and perhaps her questions to you, because the contexts are very different. Over to you, Sarah.
Hi, and good to see you again. We're together in Montreux. So I did learn a lot from you. And I think one question that comes to my mind, and it's something we discussed in Montreux around the issue of the nexus. And I just wonder, with you being a triple hatter, how do you protect the space? How do you protect the humanitarian space from the politics of the more of the drive towards the peace side and on the development side? And linked to that also then would be, I know you have a PDA, and I think you're one of those that have the joint program, if I'm not mistaken. You don't have the joint program. Okay, all right, so then I'll leave that. But I think using that point, one of the things I've raised in Montreux, and I continue to raise, I raised it at the DPPA, is the fact that we're pushing at one level the nexus, but we still have structural barriers at the HQ level with regards to implementation of the nexus, where you have for example, you have some programs where they'll tell you this is just purely about SDG 16. This is purely about peace. And it undermines the very principle of the SDGs in terms of the interlinkages and so forth. So it'd be nice to hear something from you around those areas. Thank you, and good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Great.
And, thank you for the questions. Yeah, thank you. Let's start from backwards. The nexus, the structural problems that we have within the system, and that is what I said at the beginning, that we have to put the beneficiary at the center. It's about the family that needs help. That we have different boxes how to do that the family does not care. And so that's where I see that we have to start from, and then to see how can we apply our boxes. And that's when then the structural problems come in, that each box has their own definition and their own principles. And so far, I'm trying to polish the edges of the boxes. Let's put it that way, and to see how far can we go to make it more coherent. But there are certain things which we definitely don't want to change, and that is like the humanitarian principles. So we cannot give that up. So if we have humanitarian actors, they have to work based on their principles. I don't want them to give up their principles, but I want to see how can the development actors get nearer to that, so that there is no gap between the services. So that's a little bit, something that has to be done really on the ground, on a case-by-case basis. And it needs a lot, basically, talking to people and, making them think, how is it that they can make their system work? And not saying, that's my system, I cannot do otherwise. So it is putting the beneficiary into the center and to see how can we all our boxes, to polish the edges so that that we are not leaving any gaps between the services. Now on the political and protection side, I give you one example is our elections. So October 10, Iraq had elections. The Security Council has given UNAMI the mandate, first of all, to do technical assistance to the government in preparing for the elections and managing the elections, while at the same time a mandate to do monitoring of the elections. So something that normally, based on our normal principles, you never do both, because you do even one or the other. But the Security Council has decided to do so. So already the order from top came, you have to bend all your rules. And but that was the mandate for UNAMI. But then was the notion that the whole UN has to pull together. While we have OCHA, we have UNICEF, we have UNHCR, that says we never get involved in any elections, anything that is political, we don't get involved. And at the end, we polished the edges, and it was about logistic assistance that was needed for the army of monitors all over the country. And we have used basically cars from the whole country team. We have rebranded them as Black UN, and they were not identified from which agency they came, and they were used for the elections. The cars were returned again with the branding of each agency. So for the public, it was one phase, but internally we polished the edges to it was a long process. It was not an easy process. But like everybody then at the end pulled together, and we did not violate too much our rules. So this is something that one has to take it case by case basis, and I think that there is no rule, but in each case one has to see what is possible. If there would have been like a mandatory that UN employees have to be also monitors, that would have not worked. So that definitely would have been a red line. There was a notion, it started with that, all the UN has to pull together, we need monitors so that we don't have to bring them from abroad, all UN should do that. And we said no. So we found, a way that we can help on the logistics side so that they don't have to bring armored cars from all over the world, which would have cost a ton and time-wise be impossible. But they had to bring the monitors in because we said, no, people can be asked if they voluntarily want to do it or not, but we can not ask our staff to do that. So I think this is an example where we found a way to help the political was helping the protectionist and vice versa. Because I think also for many people who then volunteered as monitors, having the experience of seeing that also gave them a lot of insights into their own work. So, I think it was not an easy battle. Yeah. So that's on this. Then to Rosemary, women leaders. When I started my career in the late 80s, so when I was interviewed at that time at IOM by one of, I think it was the Deputy Director General at that time, and at that time there were like no women in that business. That was like completely a novelty. And he asked me the question, but do you think as a woman that you can do that? Today nobody would dare to ask this question, but the question took me so aback because I thought, I never asked myself the question. I just want to do it and I try and I do it. And I think that's the same what we do now. Can women do it? If they want to do it, have the capacity, why not? Do you ask a man if a man can do it? No. So, if women, want to do it, they are ready to, to take all the things that are attached to this job and want to do it. I think that somehow I don't like so much the differentiation. I think we should see everybody has a professional, personal quality. Do they fit in the job or not? If it's a woman, it's fine. If it's a man, it's fine as well. So but in Iraq we have women overload because the SRSG is a woman and the two DSRSGs are women, and that in a country that is not known for really, being friendly to such a setting, but it works. It works because we don't make it an issue that we are women, and I think that's basically what I would say to that one. The last one, cross-border. That is there is a lot that we because Iraq is so much influenced by the neighboring countries. Let's say I have communication with the RCs, but collaboration is that would be also politically more or less impossible and not wise for us to do. But I'm in touch with all the RCs in the neighborhood, and I think that is important. I would recommend everybody to do that. Once in a while, every quarter, give a call to the RC, in your neighborhood, just to see how is your country looking from your perspective, and it helps one's own thinking.
No, just to say it's great to be on a team with lots of women leaders. I'll tell you that. It's fun. It's different. It's really, we have a great UNCT where we've got a few really strong female heads of agencies. And again, as Irene said, it's not, obviously I know, Rosemary, this isn't your question, but it's nice that it's not an issue. It's nice that it's just a balanced team, right? Where you've got diversity of nationality and diversity of gender. You've got the 3 executive leaders in the country, all women. I think it's a really great sort of model for the UN, also to subtly, communicate to the member states as well that these are UN values. And even if culturally it's a little bit difficult for some, the UN is going to promote and continue to promote, the best leadership inclusive of women wherever possible and however they can.
That's great. I have to say that it's one of the joys of working in DCO as well, because from the get-go, since we're so new, that commitment to diversity has been very strong. So we have diversity in terms of gender, but also in terms of WEOG and non-WEOG, as well as, I have to say, and this is one of the true joys, is from across the system. And this, because I was primarily in one agency before, this is really one of the unexpected pleasures. But I have a couple more questions from Silva and then from Chris. Over to Silva.
Thank you, Rosemary. And hi, my name is Silva Bonacito. I'm the Results Reporting Officer in DCO. And first of all, congratulations. It's truly inspiring to see such women's leadership. So thank you for that. My question is on communications. I would like to understand a little bit more how you showcase what we do and the results of our work as a UN family, rather than as on the humanitarian side on one side and the development side on the other. So how do we come together in terms of comms and showcasing our results? Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Sorry, and let's take
Do we have another one?
Yeah, we'll take Silka from UNICEF, I think.
Thanks, Rosemary. Yes, I'm from UNICEF, and actually, I have a question for both of you from us here in HQ that are supporting the coherence processes across our agencies and trying to support our country reps as much as we can to make the reform also work. I was wondering, do you have any asks or any suggestions? What you would like from us here in HQ to drive the processes forward on the ground? Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. And Chris, do you have one last question?
Sure, thank you, Rosemary. Actually, the question that Silka just asked was going to be my question as well, as to really what would be your request to headquarters, particularly not just of DCO, but really for the country team. What do they really need more support from headquarters on? But a second question on donors on the ground. What do you see as the role of the RC, and where are the challenges, I suppose, both in terms of donor coordination of the local donor community, and I suppose sometimes is there a disconnect between maybe the more pragmatic approach sometimes taken by the donors on the ground who have more intimate knowledge with what's going on and the need for pragmatism, and the more perhaps bureaucratic or politicized approaches that might be, or risk-averse approaches being taken by the headquarters of donor governments and so on. So I guess how does that dynamic look? What can the RC do to help improve it, I suppose? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. It's
questions at once, sorry.
No. It's good because it helps us also to shape what we do and how we do it. On the communication side, I think Iraq is a little bit. I mean, every country is specific. So, but in the Iraq setting, how we communicate what we do, because we are in a mission setting. So we have one communication working group that is co-chaired by the mission. And the mission has a political mandate and is focusing on their political messaging and is extremely careful about, messaging about other things that would compete with the political messaging, which is well understood and, it's clear because the political mandate is a very strong one. As an RC, as I realized this setting, in my previous jobs, I did a lot of strong RC communication on behalf of the country team. In Iraq, this I have scaled down because of the setting, because it would have, disrupted what the political messaging is, and there I have no influence on. So what we do is the main messaging goes from the agencies, and I'm encouraging them. I said, you as agencies, you communicate about what you do. And that is social media, press releases, all of this. From my office, it is very few press releases that go out when there is something really major. Then I do, but otherwise I don't, just because of the setting, because it might confuse also the public when you have the SRSG saying something political and then the DSRSG talks about these things, but nobody understands who is the DSRSG in the public. So I'm not a public figure, it's the SRSG that is the public figure. So I leave it up to her, and then I leave it up to the agencies to communicate. In humanitarian, it's OSHA, and that is established, and that works. So that's on the communication side. From your end?
The only thing I would just add is that because the mission actually does have a mandate to facilitate and support the work of humanitarian development agencies, the SRSG reports into the Council or technically it's the SG report that goes to the council once every 3 months, and that does include a summary of development and humanitarian activities, achievements, etc. So, although of course I don't think any of us would per se always seek to have a political mission with a mandate that has something to do with humanitarian development, it's not always an easy combination. Nevertheless, it gives an opportunity to have a public sort of accounting every 3 months of what the agencies are doing.
Yeah, so it's whom we target. So with the Security Council, that is towards donors, but the people who sit in the Security Council are not the people who give us money from government. So that's a little bit. So the targeted communication to donors is then through the working group that we have. So we have a donor coordination working group where we are basically for the humanitarian thing, where we meet once a month or something. And that's where I then communicate, I chair it and communicate with donors where we are. So
the other thing just to add to, maybe it's important to know, is that the HCT now is the Humanitarian Country Team actually is of course the UN and the NGOs is the actual HCT. But then we have, every time, we also have a meeting with donors that now has been expanded. Irena expanded it to include the development donors. So actually we have humanitarian and development donors into sort of an expanded version of the HCT, and then there's also discussions that are about specifically that development. So it's not everybody attending every meeting always understands things being discussed. We'll say when you do this cross fertilization, the donor side, I mean, but at least it's an opportunity so that everyone's aware of the conversations that are happening across the spectrum.
Yeah, so that also answers more or less the donor coordination by humanitarian it's set. And but I'm inviting also the development donors. They can, as everything is online, so that's the easiest, they can, listen in. If they have a question, they can ask a question. Because we need to train them to think, because it's not only us internally that we have these two boxes, humanitarian development, it's the donors that actually have created these two boxes. And some donors, they still live in these boxes and they are not talking to each other. So that's how we actually help them to talk to each other. And if you have, some prominent donors, they definitely have two parts of their government that is not talking to each other, what they fund. So in these coordination meetings, they learn about it, what the other side of their house is funding. So we do it in the humanitarian, in the HCT, but also in development partners forum that we have, where I invite also then the humanitarians. So that's the donor coordination that we do. And somehow it's not good that it's online, because most of them I never met in person, and I'm there over 1 year. And also because of the security situation, it's constantly changing. Some embassies, they have 6 months one set, 6 months another set of people. Some have different, arrangements. So it's very disruptive, and to have any coherent discussion with donors is rather cumbersome. So that's that. But we were also discussing when we prepared for the next HRP. So we do all of this analysis and everything, where we want to show donors, what are the most urgent needs, where is it that funding is needed. By now, donors, they know how much they will spend, and it will not be influenced about what we tell them. And that's just a reality that I think that we have to realize, that especially in some countries that are politically of a certain importance to donors, they just decide politically for their internal reasons how much money they will give to Iraq. And if we tell them that they are more or less beneficiaries, they just give the money. And so the donor relations is, of course, we want them to, fund our programs, but it is more, polishing what is it that they should fund and where is it that the money is better invested than to put it, like now we try to get them off giving any cash because we are out of humanitarian, direct assistance. Let's put money more into structural things. So, and this needs to be done like 1 year in advance, so that their thinking of their next budget, happens then. So these are, but fundraising in today's world is, when I look at Iraq, basically most donors, they know how much money they will spend in Iraq if we tell them something or not. So that is that. On anything on donors? On ask from HQ, I mean, DCO has been really wonderful. So whatever we ask, we get immediately a response, and helping me in navigating through a rather complex setting that I have inherited for different reasons. And so I think that is so far it's just because everything happens in the country and we are managing it in the country. We just need the backing from when we need any information, when we need adjustments of something. So already being there and assuring us that what we do is the right direction, or to tell us when something really doesn't look good. So this we need to know as well, and I think that is important. So I would very much expect also from headquarters to say if something doesn't look good or something is going wrong, to tell us. And we in the UN we tend to be always very nice to each other and very diplomatic. And I think we have to also, when things are not going right, also to say it so that we can resolve it. It is not that somebody is doing bad stuff. It's just everybody tries their best from their perspective, and sometimes the other perspective looks different. So I wouldn't have anything concrete other than also here talking to each other. Like, it's nice that you have a colleague that was in OCHA that is sitting here, and this would be my wish, especially in the secretariat setting, that there is more cross-fertilization between the different parts of the secretariat, as also the reform is encouraging that you have between the agencies, that people work for different agencies, because only then they will understand and will be able to represent the UN in its complexity.
Yeah. If I may, it would just add a couple things that's maybe for the agencies more than anything is I think that, throughout our discussions over the last few days, what the common theme that's coming out is the nexus, right? Everybody wants to talk about it. Everybody's interested in it. Everybody wants to work in the direction of making it functional. How do we do that is the topic of the day. How do we actually get some clear execution of what, in a meaningful way, what does that mean? And so for the agencies, what I would encourage you to do is just, reach out and try to understand. I mean, I really encourage you to spend some time talking over the next year, because it's going to change, as we improve and develop this nexus. Just try and track with it, try and understand and bring that field knowledge into HQ so that it can percolate within your own agency HQ, all those lessons learned, and then we have to then collectively across the system be able to come together to make sense of it and see how do we guide that better, because the nexus is like one of many, many things that the UN tries to do. It's just a new flavor, but how do we make it actually meaningful? How do we not just in 2 years' time, sort of forget about it and move on to the next hot topic? I mean, I think there's really value to be gained from doing this right. And I will tell you, on the humanitarian side, it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people, because what it feels like is that we're about to abandon a bunch of people, because humanitarians, to be really honest, humanitarians don't have a lot of confidence that government or development or whoever is going to come in and step in. So it's very uncomfortable for us to say, yeah, but if I don't provide them assistance, they're not going to get it. So you're telling me not to do it. That's how they internalize it. So helping us at the human level, we're all committed to the benefit of these communities. How do we at the human level also internalize, what is about to happen, and to say, okay, people are not going to be abandoned, and they will be served, but they'll be served in a different way, but this is what that looks like, and then be able to actually have an answer for what that transition is. I think these are really deep things. I think these are the reasons why sometimes it doesn't actually work, and so I think that collectively we can work through that, and I would encourage every agency to do that. The other thing I would just encourage too, this is just from my perspective as a OCHA staff member, is it's always really helpful for your field teams to understand how HQ sees the country, because we get very myopic, right? We get very focused on ourselves. and we think Iraq is like the worst place in the world, and the suffering in Iraq is like horrible. I mean, yeah, sure, okay, Afghanistan, yeah, so I saw some really red maps that say there's hunger there. Okay, yeah, that's bad. But like Iraq, like the suffering of Iraqis is like really. So I think sometimes it's helpful to kind of bring us out of our, out of our myopic focus and understand, because I think it's also where this nexus comes from, right? The notion that actually, no, in Iraq, we do have some opportunities. It's not Ethiopia. There isn't famine. There isn't this need to do this, direct delivery, otherwise people will die. Actually, there are some opportunities, and I think it's important. Headquarters can play an important role in contextualizing that. It's you have to be a bit sensitive so you don't sound like you're diminishing or disregarding the sense of commitments that your teams have in a country like Iraq towards the people. But nevertheless, it is important. And I'll just say the case in point, it was, for me, the turning point on this was apparently at the EC meeting not long ago that the Executive Committee had with the Secretary General on Iraqi elections. Apparently the Secretary General's comment on elections was very different from my view at the time, was, well, at least Iraq is having elections. At least, and so for the SG, this was like a positive, whereas I was like, oh my gosh, this is very terrible. And the country's gonna, and I was like looking at all the negatives. And so it was really transformative for me to like step back and put my brain on pause for a moment and reframe a bit and to look at it from a different perspective. So that's why I'm offering, like, for you guys at headquarters, you have this ability to see multiple countries and see the world from a different perspective, whereas we get very focused. So you can help us to step back and say, oh, okay, I can see from that perspective, actually, yeah, Iraq may actually, in a weird sort of way, be on the right path. It may have divergent steps, forward and backwards and whatever. But anyway, so those would be my two suggestions for colleagues looking at the HQ level.
Thank you, Irina and Sherry. I hope that this little outing with us has helped with the myopia. And
definitely it does. Yes.
It's taken you into the world of headquarters kinds of preoccupations. And I have to say, for us, for me, I can speak as an individual as well as on behalf of DCO, it's such a pleasure to listen to a team that is not squabbling over petty things, right? And we've seen that in so many parts of the reform. I mean, not once did you say, I have a problem with this agency not cooperating. And, you're talking about real issues that the UN is meant to present a solution for. And for me, that is absolutely inspiring. I think I can speak on behalf of my colleagues and the audience from across the system in thanking you, because I know you have very important people to meet, I'm sure, in your tour here in New York, and you've taken the time for us. It is a privilege and honor, and thank you so much, and wish you all the very best.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to everybody, and nice to see you, Rosemary, and we will talk at a later stage. So greetings to all the colleagues, and thank you for the questions. It helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, don't go away. The next session is beginning in just a few seconds with Sarah from Nepal. Sarah will just take a few